Hello, my name is Amber Hodgson, and this is Educational Leadership, Case Study Module 9. Thank you for watching. First, let's establish the facts of the case. So Richard Inman is the assistant principal at Rocket Junior High, finds himself in this ethical dilemma, following policy or doing what's best for his students. After being called to the office for tardies, James hands an item to another student. The teacher witnessing this believed it could be a drug deal and calls down to the principal. Mr. Inman calls both James and David to his office with the officer present. After searching David, he found a set of brass knuckles, which is a prohibited weapon. After the officer arrests David, James admitted that the brass knuckles were his and that he had threatened David to hold them for him. Even with James' confession, the officer escorted both boys to jail and charged them with felony possession. Mr. Inman notified both students' parents. Mr. Inman wrote the discipline referral for James, which would result in a minimum 45-day expulsion per district policy. After considering the situation, Mr. Inman did not feel that this punishment was warranted for David, and he didn't write the discipline referral. 1 week later, Mr. Inman received a call from the Director of Secondary Education. He was instructed to write the referral and follow through with the expulsion on David. If Mr. Inman didn't comply, he would get written up and officially reprimanded, which would be in his personal file. So legal or ethical issues here. In this case, David had been harmed by the actions of James and by Mr. Inman. If David didn't comply with James' demands, he'd be harmed physically. I believe David was also harmed by the school's policy as well, because even though the policy is meant to protect students, it was harmful in this case. David was in a no-win situation, which is unfair. The principal should have questioned the students separately and advocated for David upon discovering that he was a victim of bullying. David is breaking the school policy by holding those brass knuckles, and it's evident that he is aware that this is against the rules, as he was unwilling to show them to the officer prior to his pat-down. However, I believe that there should be a policy in place to protect him from the bullying abuse that he had to encounter. David's future is at risk of ruining his future plans. Mr. Inman breached his contract by not following through with the expulsion papers on David, which that was the school board policy. While his reasons are justified, he is not exhibiting equality among David and James. Let's synthesize what's happened. So Mr. Inman is contemplating advocating for David by pardoning him from further punishment since he's the victim of bullying. However, Mr. Inman will be violating legal obligations by not complying with the school's policies. So let's synthesize the facts. The people that are involved are Mr. Richard Inman, the assistant principal, who worked to foster these relationships with students, which was modeling ethical behavior and personal conduct in relationships. We have James, who is this troubled 15-year-old boy that has a history of fighting in school. We have David, who's this honor student, no discipline referrals until now. We have the school teacher that witnessed the exchange between students, and she noticed that David looked nervous. We have the school officer that arrested the boys. We have James's mother, who wanted him to sit in jail and hopefully learn this time his lesson. And then we have David's mother, who arrived at school in tears 15 minutes after a phone call to get directions to the facility. And then we have the director of the secondary education, who was encouraging Mr. Inman to follow policy and to file the expulsion papers on both students. Race was unknown, and it didn't seem to be a factor. So the places, we have Rocket Junior High, which has over 900 students. We talked about the south side. James rides the bus 50 miles from the south side. Bus 50 from the south side. Mr. Inman is also from the south side. We talked about the school hallway. The teacher witnessed an exchange between James and David in the hallway. The principal's office is where the officer found those brass knuckles on David. And we have the youth detention facility, which is where both boys were taken after being arrested. Okay, so some programs that are talked about is the junior high school, of course, where they attend school, the honors class that David attends, the school band that David is also involved in, the basketball program. Mr. Inman and James both stay after school and play basketball. And then we talk about the DAEP program, which is the District Disciplinary Alternative Education Program for students that are expelled from school. All right, so let's review and prioritize the information. Prior to this incident, David had a clean record. If Mr. Inman follows through with the discipline referral, his future will be damaged. The community stakeholders might find that the school should have protected David as he fell victim in this situation. Failure to protect David could result in some backlash. Social media posts could be made, and it would become bad publicity for the school. Students like David have stake in the outcome. Kids that are victims to bullying, they need support. Policies need to be written to protect them. Not only was David a victim of bullying, now he's a victim to the school board policy. If the policies are rewritten, it could have benefited students like David in the future from happening to them. Not all the relevant stakeholders have been consulted. While some teachers, principals, officers, and directors are aware of the situation, the community and the school board maybe are not. To fully understand the situation, a meeting needs to be had with the policymakers and the school board to be sure that that gray area is addressed. At this point, we know that the school policies are not leaving much of a choice for Mr. Inman. I would think Mr. Inman should consult with the principal in the matter and gain perspective from other professionals. All right, so let's identify options and possible consequences. Option 1, James is sent to DAEP, but Mr. Inman doesn't follow policy to file paperwork on David. David is allowed to stay in school. Mr. Inman would be written up and it's in his personal file. Option 2, policies are followed. Paperwork is filed on David and James are both sent to DAEP. Mr. Inman would be looking out for himself while witnessing the negative effects that it would have on David's future. Option 3, ask the school board to consider making an amendment to the policy to help with the gray area on the matter. And option 4, if the school board doesn't respond willingly to help, turn to the community. Post the situation on social media in hopes that the community will reach out to the school board members and influence a change in the policy. So let's evaluate our options here. If we go with option 1, Mr. Inman will be reprimanded for not complying with policy. His superiors will most likely follow suit, and David will have to attend DAEP anyway. So both Mr. Inman and David are going to suffer consequences. Let's look at option 2. If David and James would be punished equally, this would set the tone that bullies and the victims would be punished equally, and David's future is not promising. If we go with option 3, while the intent of the zero tolerance policy was to protect students from harm, it didn't account for other circumstances. This gray area needs to be addressed and the policy should be rewritten. By rewriting the policy, certain situations could be examined and handled differently according to the circumstances. Option 4, if the school board refuses to amend the policy, then the community should be informed. A post could be made on social media explaining the situation. The community can address the school board. Certain school board members might not be voted back in if they don't comply with what the community wants. While this is not a quick fix that could help David, it could maybe help future victims. So let's choose the best option, ethical or legal. As an educational leader, it is my responsibility to select the most appropriate ethical and legal course of action. But what exactly would that be? Choosing to be insubordinate against school policy and my superior's request, I am not following legal or ethical paths. Allowing a victim to be punished is unethical. As educators, our first priority is the students. This would not be keeping David's best interests first. I'd be harming his future. By turning to social media, I'd be creating havoc in the community, and that's not ethically sound option either. There isn't a clear ethical and legal option. Best case scenario, there would here would be to address the situation with the school board and hope that they can come to an agreement on amending the policy. Working together to make sure we have our students' best interests at heart and protecting everyone from harm should be our priority. We can work together to ensure that future policies are written to cultivate ethical behaviors in others. By collaborating with the school board, we would be deepening our understanding and capacity to undertake and implement change in our school setting. So implementing my decision, how would I do this? Well, here's step 1. I would have to comply with the policy. Then step 2 would be write a letter to the school board, letting them know of the injustices. Step 3 would be to speak with David's parents about these possible options, offer them support, and allow them to be a part of the process when addressing the school board to correct the zero tolerance policy in place, and by analyzing decisions in terms of establishing ethical framework. And then 4 would be write a letter on David's behalf for his file for his future. So outcomes and collaboration. Well, most likely David's parents are going to be upset, and it will take time to revise the policy. But during this time, communicate with David's family to ensure them that I'm working to resolve the issue. I need to work together with David's parents, the principals, superintendent, directors, and teachers to devise a plan of action that will advocate for ethical and legal decisions to be made. If this doesn't work, plan B should be then to consider communicating these issues with the community. The community members can communicate their concerns with school board members, making it known that the policy needs to be amended. Here are my references. Thank you for watching.